Review Board meeting to order, and can we begin with the roll call?
Mr. Cho.
Here.
Mr. Kunkel.
Here.
Mr. Otto.
Here.
Mr. Paz.
Here.
Ms. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Weiskopf.
Here.
We would request that the study session item be heard prior to hearing case number, or the item number 7, which is the case, the public hearing. So you can put that wherever you would like, probably right after the minutes, if that's amenable.
Is that acceptable to everybody? To do the study session first? Can you explain?
One of the members requested a little more background on MOR, so we've provided, or excuse me, we'll present a brief background and a little bit about the guidelines and a bit about the what regulations we need to follow.
So the thinking is it would be better to have that discussion before we review the project.
To ensure that everyone's on the same page, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody agree to that? I don't think we need to vote on that, do we? We just agree? Okay. Okay, so we'll put that as a new number 4, or we'll call it 3B, just so that we don't get the numbering confused. So then, number 3 is the approval of the previous meeting minutes. We have a lengthy document here. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to review it. Do any board members want to comment on the minutes or make any changes to the minutes? And if not, I would like to hear a motion to approve the minutes.
I have one clarification. It's on page 4. Danny had asked about a clarification regarding the setbacks, and do the setbacks exclude open porches? And Jeff Ingstrom had replied yes. In reviewing of the zoning, it looks like open porches can extend a maximum of 5 feet into the setback, but not beyond the property line, or within 5 feet of the property line.
We can make a clarification, not necessarily changing what was said, but we can add what the correct information is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Any other additions or omissions?
I move approval of the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Minutes approved. Next we have the study session, which is to make sure that we understand the intended and written guidelines for the MOR zoning district. So.
All right, so I'll try to be brief. Is this actually on? Okay. I'll try to be brief, but stop me if you want a little more detail on something. So as I mentioned earlier, and as you just indicated, wanted to provide a little bit of background on MOR since you don't meet very often. And it was established initially a while ago, but did undergo some amendments. So with that, brief history, 1990 was the downtown to campus plan. In this plan, it did call for some zoning changes in order to help recognize that the area around Green Street, Elm Street, and part of Race Street should be, when it's reconstructed, constructed with compatibility, and also to encourage adaptive reuse. That zoning district was then called the MOR in 1990. It involved rezoning about 90 parcels. Generally, those are the high-density residential, so it was a downzoning down to the mixed office residential zone. Also at that time was a development review board that was created. It, at the time, looked a lot different than what it does today. It was a staff and community member board, sort of a joint board. It was not run by, or it was not staff, or excuse me, it was not, didn't have board members such as yourself. It was actually had staff on the board as well. So this is a map of the area, which the MOR are all the blue parcels. So as I said, along Green Street and Elm Street primarily, with some along Ray Street. Between 1990 and 2003, there were 14 applications to the Development Review Board. Those projects that went through the board that were approved included both new multifamily construction and renovations to existing buildings. By 2003, there were a number of projects which created some concern among the community. People had questions about the process and about the results. Was this actually working? As a result, staff was directed by council to draft new regulations to address some of those issues, to address things like design criteria, density limits, to maintain the historic character, and to include more public participation. As I said, staff was also on the board at the time. So that amendment came about in 2003. It outlined the intent of the MOR district. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but basically to encourage mix of uses, to have compatibility with design, to encourage adaptive reuse through incentives, and to protect nearby residential uses. Also, that involved a change to the Development Review Board, no longer with staff on the board. Instead, there are 7 members here, representation from some of our other commissions, as well as specific people like an architect, developer, and then people that either live or own within the MOR, as well as a local business owner. Then the 2003 amendment also outlined when staff would review projects and when the Development Review Board would review projects. So administrative review of adaptive reuse projects was seen as one of those incentives that was called for in the campus plan, downtown to campus plan, whereas the Development Review Board would be staffed with reviewing new construction. To help guide those reviews, there are a number of objectives, 3 objectives here, 2 of them dealing with compatibility, and the third one dealing with whether or not a project meets that intent, which I referenced previously. Also, in order to provide some guidance to the Development Review Board on how to review projects, a number of review criteria were established. Again, compatibility, that is a word we hear a lot. Also addressing parking and access, screening and landscaping, site details like where trash is, and also indicating that there should be design guidelines. There are also 3 required design items for new projects that came about in the 2003 amendment. Basically, the main entrance of a principal building has to be facing the street. Facades with street frontage need to contain some windows, and parking shall be located behind the principal structure and not in the facade zone. So I referenced that design guidelines also came about. It took a few months to get those together, of course, but those address a number of issues, and since the criteria that they address include the facade zone, building orientation, massing and scale, openings, outdoor living space, materials, parking areas, landscaping, and when applicable, commercial site design. So what this does is help guide new construction, because obviously if it's an existing building, it's going to already have many of these things already in place. What this also does is, as we, as staff, evaluate a project, we go through each of these and then we provide you our analysis on this as well, so that we are reviewing them in advance of your review, of course, and providing that recommendation, which we do for all of our cases. So, in summary, adaptive reuse projects are administrative reviewed. Now, the exception to that is if they do an adaptive reuse and then add a giant addition onto it. That would, of course, be kicked to you. Development Review Board reviews the new construction projects as well as large additions on adaptive reuse. And as I mentioned, there are a number of ways to help guide your review and also to guide staff's review. Those objectives, the site plan review criteria, those 3 required design items, as well as the design guidelines. So just wanted to briefly go through that, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are some.
What is adaptive reuse defined as, I guess, within MOR or MOR?
I could pull exact language, so I could do that, or I will just give you the layman's answer. Basically, if you have what was an old house and you wanted to put a business in that old house, that's certainly acceptable, but it would require some renovations on the inside, of course, to bring it up to commercial code standards, for instance.
And I guess you mentioned there's incentives for that. Can you
Well, the
details on that?
incentives were part of the downtown to campus plan, and how that was transferred into or translated into the MOR zoning district was by providing it as an administrative review, so that you save the time. So it's a bit of a quicker process, generally speaking, when it's administratively reviewed, and therefore that's the incentive.
If, according to the staff report, on each one of the items that they analyze, the staff report says that it meets the intent, is there any basis upon which the legitimate basis that the board could refuse the application, or is that essentially say that by right the application should go forward?
No, it is your role as the board to evaluate our analysis.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
I just want to make a comment. At that last meeting, it seemed like the massing and scale of that building was a big concern. And so I don't know if, you've set that criteria up in the MOR and the zoning for those figures and how you calculate it. Has there been any review since then about that, if they need to take a look at that?
Not since the last meeting, no. But I think this exercise is part of that process to refamiliarize ourselves with the MOR details so that we can start thinking about that.
Yeah. Maybe we can move right into the study session, because I think that comment maybe has to do with, or all of the comments have to do perhaps with the idea of making sure that we're familiar and how we're interpreting the MOR district.
The intent was, the request as I understood it was to give a bit of background and sort of to make sure everyone understood the regulations that we're using today are based on that 2003 amendment. It hasn't been amended since then.
But I think the intention of the study session is to review, is to take that background information, but also have it serve as a basis for review of the MOR, whether that be things that we think are strong about the MOR or things that we feel need to be adjusted as they've been adjusted in the past. So I would think that perhaps the question that you just asked about massing and scale is one of the things that perhaps needs to be defined. I think there were several things that were brought up last time. One was about economic interest, and I think you mentioned that it indicates that it lies in the economic interest of the residents and not the landowner, if I'm quoting the minutes. And so there are a lot of things I think that were raised in the last session that perhaps suggest that we need to reconsider some of the issues involved with the MOR.
Lori, I guess I don't know if you know this figure off the top of your head, but I guess the summary said, or the presentation said, that this is to encourage more adaptive reuse or within the MOR district.
Well, that was in the initial intent. 2003 made it more clear by offering the design guidelines that it is not just that as a component, it is also to have the new construction, when it does come, to be more compatible with the neighborhood.
Right. And then I guess if has that worked since 2003? Has there been more development, or has it been prohibitively kind of stuck
Well,
in the
certainly
same?
a large portion between 2003 and now was part of the recession, so I'm
Correct.
not sure we can, it's a good comparison. There have been, and I didn't pull the exact number, but a handful or so of cases since 2003.
So is it I guess, would you deem it a success, or is it still relatively, it needs more tweaking, or do we still find ourselves discussing criteria? I guess I'm not.
Perhaps since we're in post-recession now, what we can see is the projects that are coming in now and kind of look at that and see if that would help guide any tweaks that might be needed. Obviously, we'd be happy to hear your comments on that, whether it's at this meeting or perhaps we can set up a separate meeting to discuss it more in detail or take comments via email. It's really up to you.
I'd like to answer Matt's question or question another way. I think that what we heard at the last meeting was that there's not a consensus as to whether it's successful or not. There's also a lot of variation in the interpretation, either from speakers from the audience, the public audience, and members of this board. There is a viewpoint of various interpretations of what it means, of even what the district is. I think that there's one viewpoint that the historicism should be the most important aspect of it. There's another viewpoint that maybe the development, the sensitive development, needs to be the important aspect of it. And I think that what we saw last time was that those are cannot necessarily always be fulfilled by a single project, or that they cannot both be resolved in a single project. It can't always be a win-win situation, perhaps. Well, I guess I, for one, am comfortable with the conflict, because I think that's just the nature of a living organism, be it a person or an entity, a place, and that we have to use our own judgment and value systems in order to interpret each one, and by definition, those value systems are going to be different in everybody's case. I guess I would ask the board, do you have any strong opinions that there need to be specific changes in the MOR guidelines at this point?
To me, adaptive reuse implies that some way or another the current structure is adapted so it's reusable or continued use. And I think Carolyn Baxley, who was here last time and gave testimony, and in subsequent conversations with her, she was on city council, I believe, in 1990 when this was first launched, and was pushing for the 2003 revisions, and the preponderance of proposals resulted in a teardown. So if the goal in 1990 was to encourage the reuse of the historic structures, then it seemed to be failing. And so I think if that's the primary purpose, and then we need to look whether that's working or whether the primary purpose is economic development and a growth of the real estate tax base, then I think we need to be clear about that, because it did seem like the growth of the real estate tax base for some people, seemed to be a legitimate sort of interest in the project. And I know the city needs that overall, but when we have a district that we're trying to preserve the character of the district, then that might mean sacrificing a building that would be worth more than the existing building in order to preserve the character of the district. So, it's not clear that the current guidelines are meeting the purpose of this in 1990 or the 2003 revisions. It seems like it leads to the result we had last time, where technically he met the code requirements in terms of parking, I guess on the massing and scale, some of us. And so it seemed like most people felt like there was no basis to say no, even though the house that was there was economically feasible as a rental, and it was in good shape and so on. So I do think that we need to look at that, and if adaptive reuse is not legitimate anymore, then let's simply say so and disband the district or something.
And if I may point out, in 2003, that did come up, and there was a recognition that perhaps the 1990 plan didn't foresee that not everybody wanted to convert their old houses to little retail shops. So there wasn't really the market there, and that also helped drive the discussion in 2003.
I wonder if you have information. You had mentioned that in basically a way of developing some data. You said there were 14 applications between 90 and 03. And then since 03, do we have a number?
Fewer than that. I don't at the top of my head. It's probably in the neighborhood of 7.
Okay.
So.
I guess my question was, of those, how many of them are adaptive reuse? How many are teardowns? Because I think that would give us a sense of whether, say from a 5-year period to 5-year period, or in this case we have 13-year period and 12-year period, or breaking down into smaller increments, if there's been any change in that, or whether it's consistent, or whether the same issues are coming up consistently across the
I
time.
can provide that information in an email to you all.
I think that would be very helpful to give us a sense of a larger perspective of whether this is going, because I think that the adaptive reuse is great, but I also thought that the developer gave a pretty compelling argument for why he couldn't work with that existing building with the demands that he saw for the site, for the area. But I think that's one case, and I think these things change over time, and I wonder if, and there are incentives for adaptive reuse, and I wonder if those incentives are changing the overall context of decisions that are being made by property owners in that district.
I think there's perhaps a third possibility too, which is, if we look at that data from over the last 12 years and the 7 plus or minus projects, it's also possible that there are other contemplated projects that were out there during that time period that didn't occur and never even reached this stage because the requirements of the MOR district dissuaded the property owner from moving forward, either from an expense standpoint or a complication or whatever it might have been. So that I think would be also the challenge in a pretty small sample set like that to be able to discern how much didn't happen because of the additional requirements as well.
But we wouldn't have any data on that, would
No,
we?
no. So I'm saying, I guess I'm saying just we have to be careful about that in terms of our the weight that we assign to whatever that turns out that those 7 projects turned out to be.
Well, yes, and I think that the more restrictions that are placed on a given place, the fewer people are going to see opportunities to do things. I think that's just the nature of the preservation. What we're doing is tightening the envelope for adaption. So the more tightly defined it is, the fewer people are going to be, and that's just, you know, that's character versus economics, or whatever dynamics you want to say. And I think that what we're trying to do here is find that, I guess, uncomfortable balance between the two. And I think it would be very helpful to see if historically we are somehow finding a balance. And every property is different. I mean, a house might look like a large house might look like a large house, but the internal, the ability to make those modifications can be completely different depending on one plan to another. And so I think that case by case, it's really difficult to say, well, this person did this, so this person should do this, so this person should do this, because every case is very individual.
Do you know whether there have been any projects that have simply been turned down or required substantial revision before being approved?
I can include that in my follow-up to you.
Okay. Are there any more comments by the board in this study session? I think that I think the idea of getting some kind of historical perspective of the types of projects that have been heard here will be very helpful, along with whatever additional information you can give us about applications, whatever we have. Anybody else?
Sorry. So the MOR, I don't know how long it's been in place actually, but
1990, that was my second slide.
oh, 1990. But I guess this was a study session for me. But basically, are other cities doing or continuing with MOR as a strategy for adaptive reuse, or is there something that is changed? I mean, I see mixed office and residential. Obviously, work has changed, or how people work have changed, how businesses operate. Is this an outdated zoning, or is there something better?
Well,
more
every
current?
community, of course, has their own strategy. Some are more cutting edge than others, of course. What we're doing to help look at how businesses are changing and how the live-work environment is changing, as we are looking right now at our home occupation regulations. So you often do have that merging of home and work life. So we're hoping that our changes there will help address some of those issues. In terms of mixed use, I mean, it's always going to be something that we strive to achieve, because obviously if you can live and work in the same neighborhood, then there's so many benefits from environmental to social. So I'm not sure, I can't say that it's not working or that it's outdated at this point. If there are tweaks that need to be made, that's certainly something that the city can talk about and council can look at. But I'm not sure that it's, on its premise, is a bad idea, having that mix of uses, because that is, generally speaking, something as planners we strive to achieve, where it's feasible and where it makes sense. Parking's on our list in general, yes. Things to evaluate our parking requirements.
Yeah.
Is this in response to following Champagne's lead and a zero parking requirement in Campus Town?
It's just in response to our usual looking at our zoning ordinance and trying to not bring it up to today, but bring it up to, as close to today as we can get.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, because that strikes me as an example of one of those things that, if we want to incentivize adaptive reuse, that's another area where it's a real easy thing to say, hey, if you want to build, tear down and rebuild, you got to meet this parking requirement. But if you're willing to adaptively reuse, we're gonna give you a break on that. So I think there's a whole basket of tools that are out there from a code standpoint that can help sort of tilt the scale back in one direction or the other if we feel it's not accomplishing its purpose. And I guess my personal preference is that I like those kinds of answers more than a ratcheting down of the requirements on the other side. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess in response to the question that you asked maybe 5 minutes ago about do we need to revisit MOR zoning requirements, I think I would be interested in seeing something innovative and something that does actually work and encourage adaptive reuse contextually for the more districts that are in Urbana.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I think that was helpful. And the next continuing of public hearings, I don't think we have any public hearings that are continuing. Do we have any old business?
Just what we reported last time about the bylaws. I know that there was an interest in combining the design and the development review boards as reported last month. We are looking at potentially creating another area that would require some design review, and so I think that should all be merged into one conversation.
Can you give us a little information on the other area?
We currently, in response to our downtown plan, we are looking at downtown design guidelines or downtown design district. We're just starting that process to go into public input, so I don't have a lot of information. We're going to kind of figure out what it is that the community would like to see and respond to that.
Thank you. Okay, new public hearings. Where's the guideline? Okay, first we'll hear a summary of the case.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Marks. I'm with the Planning Department. Summarized the case before us. This is a request by Mr. Kima Karalamum to construct a new one-car garage on his property at 410 West Elm Street, which is a single-family residential lot in the MOR Mixed Office Residential District. We've already done a summary of the MOR design review guidelines and the district itself. So just quickly, a review of the subject property in the surrounding area. It's located at 410 West Elm. It's zoned MOR. The surrounding properties are mostly zoned MOR as well. And to the south, there is an office complex with a yoga studio and a dental. I'm sorry, to the north, and then to the south, to the west and east, you will have single-family homes and multi-unit residential apartments as well. The applicant is requesting to install a single-car garage to replace a previously existing garage which has already been demolished. Just to, give a summary of the surrounding zoning. One of the multi-unit properties to the south is zoned R4, and then the businesses to the north are zoned B2. Then the future land use designation for the property, as well as most of the properties to the south, is mixed residential, and to the north it's campus mixed use. But the applicant is requesting to install a garage on his property located in the south. It would be a one-car garage. The previous garage you'll see in the imprint on the illustration right there was a two-car garage with access to an alley. This garage would be placed slightly more to the left or to the west on the property with an eastern access from the alley, and it would be supported by an access drive of permeable pavers as well. Just to give the dimensions, the new garage would be approximately 20 feet by 12 feet, set back 2 feet from the alleyway, along with an access drive of dimensions 27 feet by about 18 feet. And just some site visuals of how the property currently looks. So for the review criteria of the site plan, just to quickly go over the proposal, in terms of compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood, the height and scale and layout of the proposed garage would be similar to most of the other structures on the block and in the area. The location of the garage is behind the house, which is similar to the properties, also being detached. The architectural features would be similar as well, and as detailed under the design guidelines in terms of its color and its texture. For the parking and access, the application requests to place a previously existing detached two-car garage. New site plan would allow for one space inside the garage, one space outside the garage on the access drive. The plan would also allow for the preservation of a parking spot that's accessible from what technically is a driveway, accessible off of Elm Street. That driveway does not reach to the backyard, or if it did, it would have to be continued with an approved surface, but it does allow for an off-street parking space. So in total, the property could still accommodate three vehicles in off-street parking. Yes. Mm-hmm. And for the screening and landscaping, the subject property has 3 large trees, which would be unaffected by the installation of this garage. And then for site details in regards to storage, loading areas, lighting, or signage. The proposal doesn't have any provisions for location of trash receptacles or outdoor storage of equipment or anything. It's pretty clear that being a one-car garage, that storage of the vehicle seems to be the primary purpose. There would be, the applicant has indicated no plans for installing lighting on the garage. And so the parking of the availability of parking, the flow of traffic, most of those elements would remain the same. For the design review guidelines, for the facade, the garage is located in the rear of the house from the property's facade zone along Elm Street, the frontal facade. The garage would also be less visible than the previous garage, so it has a minimally impacts the facade zone. It's city staff's recommendation that this proposal meets the design guidelines for the facade zone. The building orientation and patterns, the next element, that block maintains the mostly traditional layout with single-family homes and with the decorative landscaping, front-facing entrances, detached rear garages. The proposed garage would still be located behind the house, still have traditional access off the alleyway, and it would preserve the existing building orientation of the principal structure in the front. Is that the guideline as well for building orientation and pattern scale? The height to width ratio is compatible with the surrounding area. The garage is about 13 feet high at the height of the gable. It would also be narrower, but it would be approximately the same height, and it would have a smaller footprint than the previous garage. It would have a similar height to other structures on the block as well. It's the city staff recommendation that the proposal meets the design guideline for massing and scale. For openings, the garage will not have any windows. It will have a pedestrian door as well as overhead door for the vehicle entrance and departure. City staff recommends that the proposal meets this guideline for openings as well. For outdoor living space, the standard really is not applicable. It does not have any regard for the porches or balconies or change to the outdoor living space of the principal structure. It does, for a practical matter, increase the amount of available green space in the rear yard, but it does not really apply to the outdoor living space. So therefore, city staff recommends that this is not applicable for that matter. For the materials, the proposed material is a prefabricated sheet metal designed to be durable. The metal has a pattern of mimicking the traditional wood lap siding that's found on the garage. This wasn't included in the packet, but it probably would be worth showing to the lower right-hand corner. You'll see that's a pretty typical representation of the garage that the applicant would be installing, and the image to the left is just the color would be a light blue color, similar to the color of the house. The metal building material does offer a durability. The shape of the roof is a traditional pitch, although it would not be a shingled roof. It would be at least visually similar for the material. Metal is not listed as an encouraged material, but it at least offers durability and is similar to another garage that's neighboring to the property, which is also found right here. Although that is a shingled roof, but that's a similar building material found on a nearby garage. It's a city staff recommendation that the proposal meets the design guideline for materials, with the condition that the material stipulates a lap siding as found in the visual. For parking areas, the proposed garage would have access from the alley on the north side of the property, just like the previously existing garage. The access drive made from permeable pavers has around 396 square feet of turnaround space available for any exiting vehicle, so the vehicle would not be required to back out onto the alleyway, and the garage would only be large enough to hold one vehicle. The overall capacity of the property would still remain the same for 3 vehicles. It's a city staff recommendation that this proposal meets the design guidelines for parking areas with the condition that the access drive between the garage and the alley be paved with an unapproved surface as required in the zoning ordinance. And permeable pavers, as indicated by the applicant, is one of those approved surface materials. For landscaping, the construction of the garage really would not alter the landscaping on the property. The applicant has stated that the garage size and location would allow for improved landscaping and garden space in their backyard than previously was allowed. Since the applicant owns this property, it's an owner-occupied unit. It's not leased out to tenants. Yeah, most likely. And city staff recommends that the proposal meets the design guidelines for landscaping. Commercial site design is not applicable since this is not a commercial structure. So the board has the following options. They can approve the application based on the findings. They can approve it with conditions. You may continue the case to a later meeting or to request additional information, or you may deny the application. If so, you should articulate findings supporting the denial. So based on the evidence presented in the following case, staff recommends the Development Review Board approve case DRB 2015-02 with the following conditions: that the garage is constructed as generally indicated on the attached site plan, that the access drive between the garage and the alley be paved with an approved surface as required in the zoning ordinance, such as concrete, asphalt, or permeable pavers, although not limited to those 3 options. And the third condition being that the building material of the garage simulates a lap siding pattern, such as the shingle-style exteriors found on the surrounding houses in the district. The applicant is here to answer any questions if you have any. Do you have any questions for the staff regarding the proposal?
Yes.
You focused on that there's currently 3 parking spots, and this wouldn't diminish that. Is the site required to have 3?
The site's required to have 2 spaces as a single-family residential home.
Okay.
I guess I do have a question about the third recommendation. A lap siding pattern, and then it says such as a shingle-style exteriors found in the surrounding houses. The image that we're looking at on the lower right is not really a lap siding, but is more of a kind of horizontal corrugated metal, which gives, to me, what's important about it is that it gives pattern and scale to the project, but not necessarily that one material needs to imitate another material. So I wonder if we could, my own personal opinion, I would say that if this is what we're saying is acceptable, then I'd like to see language that actually expresses that that's what we're
You would have the
asking for.
option of changing that condition right now to adjusting the language in that. If I think if your intention is the same as the condition.
Yeah, well, I think something like pattern and scale with shingle style, or with a surrounding neighborhood, and because I think that's what we're asking for in this case.
May I read that back to see if that sounds all right? The building material of the garage simulates the pattern and scale of the exteriors found on the surrounding houses in the district. Is that?
Any discussion with the board? Are there any questions for the petitioner?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
uh,
Do you want to come forward? Please state your name.
Hello, I'm Kima Karolumum, and just thank you guys for coming out tonight.
I see that the maximum square footage for a garage is 750, and then you're proposing 240. Did you scale down your project knowing that you had to go through MOR, or would you have wanted a bigger garage?
No, we did this single car mostly because we only have the one car and would prefer the green space in the backyard rather than filling it up with the structure.
Okay.
I've got a question. Is the roof steel sheeting the same as the siding? So it's a kind of a rib imprint, but
Yeah.
it's actually the same material except on the siding it's turned sideways?
It's a ribbed material. I think the spacing is a bit wider on the roof. I don't think it's as narrow, and it's oriented vertically, so like snow and stuff would slide down the track, but I don't think it is exactly the same. It is similar, though.
And I was told that the height of the walls are approximately 9 feet, and then the roof pitch is about 4 feet at the peak.
Yeah, it's 9 feet legs, and then I estimated the pitch, but based on the
On this sketch?
yeah, so based on the width of those bands, it's about 4 feet to the peak.
This picture looks a little shallower, but
It could be a little less, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Are there any other proponents or opponents to be heard? Any other staff clarifications? Any discussion by the MOR board? Anybody want to call for a vote?
I'd move in the case of DRB 2015-02 that we approve the applicant's petition with the amendment that was previously offered to the conditions. Do I need to read those again, or
I can if you would like, otherwise.
no? No, I'm fine with it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. You want to call the vote?
Mr. Cho,
Yes.
Mr. Kunkel,
Yes.
Mr. Otto, Mr. Paz,
Yes.
Ms. Smith, Mr. Weiskopf.
Yes.
Okay. The project is approved. Do we have any new business?
No.
No new business? Audience participation, I don't think we have audience participation. Staff report, additional staff report, as we've done the study session. Can we have a motion for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay.